Hello everyone and welcome back to American Ultras Talk. The roster for the USMNT January camp, more commonly known as Camp Cupcake, is out now, featuring 23 MLS players and one unattached player. Now, obviously it's not the most exciting roster, given that it's only domestic-based players and it's basically a US C or D team, but we thought it'd still be a good idea to put out a video recapping the roster, analyzing some of the key players who are here that are going to be the ones to watch, mainly the young guys, some of the key players who aren't here, the snubs, a couple of which were not released, but others that should have been picked by Poch and weren't. And overall, just give you guys a little preview of what to expect in the two games against Venezuela and Costa Rica. Don't worry, Yuri will be back next video, but for now, we just thought it'd be better to get out a video than to wait another day since it's already out a little late. Sorry about that, guys. But without further ado, let's just get into the goalkeepers. And there's 4 of them here, which already is a bit of a weird one, considering that, yeah, there's 2 games, but why bring 4 goalkeepers, especially when 2 of them are as mediocre as Drake Callender from Inter Miami and Zach Steffen from the Colorado Rapids? Now, let's be honest, these 2 players are only here because of a couple of reasons. Number one, they have USMNT experience in the past. I mean, Steffen's even gotten a call-up under Poch, which is kind of ridiculous, honestly, considering that he's statistically the worst starting goalkeeper in MLS from this past season. And there's also the fact that Steffen, from his case, played at Man City. Poch remembers him from Man City, so he's like, oh, this guy must be good. Callender, of course, plays for Inter Miami with Messi. Of course, has the Argentine and Duels Old Boys connections to Poch. So it's just easy goalkeepers for Poch to call up without having to actually watch MLS. Now, the good ones, Matt Fries, who was, in my opinion at least, and stats would back that up, the best American goalkeeper and one of the best goalkeepers in all of MLS this past season. Well deserving of a call-up, still relatively young, I believe he's 26. And then Patrick Schulte, of course, we all know, the Columbus Crew goalkeeper. U23, he was our keeper in the Olympics, has been on the bench for the USMNT main team a couple times under Poch and previously. He's probably one of the main contenders to challenge Turner for the starting spot before 2026. So those 2 are great. Hopefully they each get 1 game. Steffen shouldn't be here. Callender shouldn't be here. The fact we have 4 goalkeepers in the first place doesn't really make sense, especially when you consider that there's only 4 midfielders, but more on that later. Really, the only other goalkeeper that you could say should be here is Chris Brady from the Chicago Fire. Not based on quality now, but he's still so young, only 20 years old. The potential is more than definitely there. I would have much rather seen him here than Callender or Steffen, but hopefully it shouldn't matter anyway because none of them will play. Now onto the defenders, where it gets a little bit more interesting. Max Arfson is here from the Columbus Crew. He's a left back / right back, mainly played as a wing back for the Crew in their back 5 system. Very good 2-footed player, can play on both sides, pops up with a lot of assists as well, and even some goals, 5 goals, 7 assists in all contributions from the left wing back spot primarily for the Crew in their, of course, very successful season this past year. Still only 23. I really like this inclusion. He's a bit of an underrated guy, but I had him in my roster prediction video, and I'm glad he's here. Now, next up, George Campbell, the center back from CF Montreal. I'll be honest, he's not going to set the world alight, but I'm fine with him being here just because, again, he's also 23. You guys might remember him from some of the pre-Olympic camps. He was part of the contention for the roster. Didn't ultimately make the final cut, but he's fine. An average MLS center back, but he's at least younger than some of the other options here. Next up, you have Daewon Jones, another fullback, also from the Columbus Crew, just like Arfsten, another guy who can play on both sides. It's a little interesting to see him here, considering that he was kind of a rotational player for the Crew once joining them. Popped up with some big moments here and there, but overall, I think there's a lot better options, although I will say he might be here because of a player who wasn't released. I'll get to that very soon. Next up, you have the other right back here to contend with Daewon Jones. Hopefully he doesn't play because Jones is a much better player, but you have Shaq Moore, just got traded to FC Dallas from Nashville, where he did not have that good of a season within MLS. Of course, has 19 more caps than he should already, somehow scored a goal. Hopefully he's just here as, I guess, veteran leadership. I'm not sure how good of a leader he is, but there's really no explanation for Shaq Moore being in this roster. Next up, Jalen Neal, just got traded actually to CF Montreal today as I record this from the LA Galaxy. Of course, a huge shock with the MLS Cup champs trading their homegrown defender. Love the move for Jalen Neal. I think it's a great place for him to go and revitalize his career a little bit. He did lose his starting spot with the Galaxy. Of course, after coming back from that long-term injury, he got put into the lineup and then lost his spot to Garces towards the end of the season. And obviously it worked out for the Galaxy. They won MLS Cup. Fresh start in Montreal. They've already revitalized so many careers of Americans. So I think it's the perfect spot for him. Hopefully he does well there. And I'm very excited to see him in this camp. Next up, you have, I'll just tackle the remaining three center backs at the same time because it's the same situation. Tim Ream from Charlotte, Miles Robinson from Cincinnati, and Walker Zimmerman from Nashville. All three veteran guys, some more so than others. Of course, Tim Ream being the main USMNT captain for the A team. Of course, Zimmerman was the co-captain with Tanner Tessman, or the vice-captain at the Olympics. Miles Robinson was also at the Olympics and has even gotten a call-up under Poch, but as we all know, was not very good in the Olympics and is just not very good overall. All three of these guys are veterans who realistically should not have much of a future with the USMNT, besides, I guess you can say, Tim Ream, but he's also very, very old, in his high 30s, so we need to look for options to replace him anyway. Hopefully Jalen Neal can be one of those guys. Having all three of them here makes absolutely no sense. I'll just say it. They're all three older, past their best, and besides maybe Robinson, but his best isn't even that good anyway. It just makes no sense to take a spot from a younger center back. I'll get to the snubs after talking about John Tolkien, the last defender here, the other left back to compete with Arston. Truthfully, I hope both of them start one game because I'm curious to see what we can get from Max Arston. John Tolkien, I think the Olympics showed what we have in him already, as well as, of course, his time with the New York Red Bulls, helping them make the MLS Cup final where they lost to the Galaxy. He's been very, very good for them in MLS. His time has come to make a move to Europe. Hopefully it happens in the January window, and hopefully his performances in these two games can help teams scout him and want to make the move for him, because I think he has a very good chance to contend for a senior team spot, because we don't really have good depth at the left back position behind Anthony Robinson, especially with Nathaniel Brown probably looking like he's going to choose Germany. There's a spot open there for John Tolkien, with Christopher Lund now becoming a rotational backup player in Serie B. The spot's open. John Tolkien can be the guy to capitalize, and he's one of the main players to watch out for in this roster. Now, some players to note that are not here. We'll start with two players who were not released for the camp by their respective clubs, Nathan Harriel from the Union and Jackson Reagan from the Seattle Sounders. Now, both of these players were not released, along with one in the forwards list, Quinn Sullivan, the fellow Union player with Harriel, because these clubs are in preseason in Spain, and ultimately they decided to be better to have their players for that. Now, you might see Jack McGlynn from the Philadelphia Union is in the midfielders list. This probably, at least hopefully, indicates that McGlynn might not be in the plans of the Union, and they could be looking to sell him to Europe in January, which is perfect from my perspective, because even as a Union fan, it'll hurt to see him go. It's what's best for his career, and if he wants to make a USMNT impact at any point in his career, he's still only 21, has so much time, but he needs to make the move to Europe now and step up a couple levels before getting to that ultimately spot. And I mean, he has so many talents that could help the USMNT one day, so hopefully he does make that move. But regardless, Nathan Harriel not being released is probably why Shaq Moore or Daewon Jones are here. I think he obviously would have been the starter over those two, considering he was the starter in the Olympics, still just 23. And Jackson Reagan was the only American Defender of the Year finalist within MLS, had a very good season for the Sounders, has been linked to Europe, specifically Belgium in the past. And it would have been nice to see him here, specifically over Robinson, Zimmerman, even someone like George Campbell, who's a couple of years younger, but really not even close to as good. But it is what it is. It's not a huge loss, really, because if you look at the grand scheme of things on the center back depth chart, Jackson Reagan's pretty far down the list anyway. Now, on to the midfielders. Actually, wait, I'll just mention a couple other center backs that were snubbed that probably should have been here over Zimmerman and Robinson. Forgot about that. Andrew Privet from Charlotte FC had an excellent season there, of course, partnering Tim Ream and another one, Adilson Malanda, who's French, part of the best defense in MLS, at least in my opinion. And I think only being 24, he deserves a spot more than some of the other guys. And then there's Fernando Alvarez, another center back from CF Montreal, trying that with Colombia and Mexico. I've heard all three federations are interested in him. It would have been great to see him in this camp, still only being 21 years old, but it is what it is. I guess Poch prefers some of the leadership that some of these guys bring. There's also Noah Kai Banks, someone like that from Augsburg, or Noah Cobb from Atlanta, who could have been interesting options. Now, a U20 roster is expected to drop for this January. Let us know in the comments if you want to see a video covering that roster and breaking that down. But if Banks would have been released by Augsburg, which I think is maybe possible, considering that he's not really much of a first-team player. Specifically, this goes for Noah Cobb, though. I assume he'll be in the U20 team, but it would have been, I think, better to see him here than someone like Robinson, Zimmerman, Campbell. But anyways, now let's move on to the midfielders, and there's not much to talk about because there's only 4 of them. Benjamin Kramaski, who also could have been with the U20s, but he's here. From Inter Miami, of course, you have Emeka Anelli, a very underrated center defensive mid / right back. He can play in both positions. From Real Salt Lake, had a great season with them in MLS, led them to being one of the best teams in the West. And I think I'm very glad that he's here, considering the lack of other CDM options within MLS. And I mean, you see there's only 4 midfielders, so he's the only 6 in this roster. I feel like he'll get some significant playing time. Diego Luna, his Real Salt Lake teammate, is also here, of course. Probably the biggest name in terms of what USMNT fans can already expect. I think he's absolutely the main player to watch in this camp. Such a talented player, won MLS Young Player of the Year for RSL, playing as a left mid, but he's listed as a midfielder here. He'll probably be playing as a center attacking mid in Poch's system. Cannot wait to see what he can do in this roster against some weaker Venezuela and Costa Rica teams. I think he could absolutely cook, and then he's another one, of course, who should be on the radar for a potential transfer to Europe sooner rather than later, alongside Jack McGlynn, the other 8 in this team alongside Kramaski. We've already talked about him a little bit, but such a talented player, absolute wand of a left foot. Can play the ball anywhere, anytime, and there's so many talents that he has that are so unique, especially as an American. So very excited to see this midfield group, although let's be real, it should be a little bit bigger. You can probably see in the forwards, some of them can play as midfielders. Caden Clark can play in the midfield, Mako Miljevic, Vasilev, even Brian Gutierrez can play there, but I think it's just a little depleted, specifically at the 6th spot, and Daniel Edelman absolutely should have been here, the 21-year-old former US U20 captain at the last World Cup from the New York Red Bulls. He, of course, led them to the MLS Cup final, where they did end up losing, but he was a key part of that team as a starter every game in the midfield, providing consistency at the base of it from the 6th position. It makes no sense why he's not here, and he clearly agrees. If you look at his Instagram story, he is clearly as upset at the decision as I am, and I can't really blame him for it, because considering how few midfielders are here, I think it's kind of criminal, honestly, that he didn't get a spot. I mean, 5 center backs, 4 goalkeepers. Really, what are we doing here? Give the man a spot. Even someone like Edwin Cerrillo, who was the 6th for LA Galaxy in their championship run, I think is much more deserving than some of these other players. And at the end of the day, you just need more depth at that position. It doesn't really make sense what Poch is doing there. Another guy who should have been here, he's not really a 6, he's more of an 8 or even an attacking player, but Cole Bassett absolutely should have been here, considering how good of a season he had. 15 goal contributions with the Colorado Rapids. Still only 23. He did only just recover from injury, so maybe that's part of the reason why he's not here, but still, I'd rather see him than, again, a 4th goalkeeper who's not going to get any minutes. Now, on to the forwards, the final part of the roster, the very mediocre roster. You have Patrick Adjumong, a striker from Charlotte FC, another player who's a little bit slept on. I mentioned him in the roster prediction video as someone who I thought might have a chance with the team, and it looks like Poch proved me correct. I'm kind of excited to see him here. He's not really anything special by any means, but he has a great story. If you look it up, he originally played for a Division III team in college, transferred to D1, made his way to MLS, and now at the USMNT. It's a very cool story, at least on a personal level. He got 10 goals this year for Charlotte as a striker, still just 24. I think it's definitely worth calling him and seeing what he can do. Realistically, he's just this season's version of Duncan Maguire, but he at least earned his call-up, so that's nice to see. Next up, you have Caden Clark from CF Montreal. He's one of the players earlier who I was kind of alluding to when I mentioned the young Americans that Montreal has gotten and revitalized the career of, because we all know how it went in Europe with him. Even at Minnesota United earlier this year, he was not playing that amazingly. Montreal get him, and at the 10 position, he was a completely different beast. 4 goals, 2 assists in 10 games for them. Very excited to see what he can do here. Still just 21 years old as well, so has a bright future ahead of him, a couple more good seasons in MLS, and he could absolutely be back on the way to Europe and have a very successful career there. Next up, a player who I'm sure everyone is familiar with, El Pirata, Jesus Ferreira, from, it says FC Dallas, but he's going to Seattle Sounders in a big trade. $2 million that they traded for him, which is huge in terms of MLS money, all the made-up Garber bucks that they have there. But as you guys know, El Pirata, he loves preying on the weak, the small island nations in the Caribbean. Unfortunately, we won't be playing any of those in these camps, but it's a weak Venezuela, probably a B or C team for them. Same for Costa Rica. It's going to be mostly domestic-based players for them. So I see no reason why Ferreira shouldn't start in this camp and get several goals. I mean, he's still relatively young as well. I think he's 24 or 25. Not that he has much of a chance at the USMNT because he basically made the move to Sounders instead of exploring a move to Europe, but can't blame him. Chasing the bag, he still does have 15 USMNT goals to his name, so this camp could probably get him a little bit higher up that leaderboard. Next up, you have Brian Gutierrez, a very exciting winger/attacking midfielder from the Chicago Fire. The first time he's been in the USMNT camp, he should make his debut, and very well-deserved call-up. Another one like Luna, who is a Mexican dual national, and it's nice to see him here with us despite not even being cap-tied and previously rejecting so many calls from the Mexican Federation. It's good to see where his loyalties lie, and I'm very excited for him. Still being so young as well, just 21 years old. He's definitely worth taking a look at. I think he's one of the top players to watch in these two games. I'm very excited to see what he can do. He was one of the only bright spots in the Fire this past season, and what was once again a poor year for them, but definitely, I think, the top forward to watch from this group. Next up is a guy who I'm sure USMNT fans are familiar with now due to the drama that he's undergone, especially on Twitter. Matko Miljevic, a guy who was with CF Montreal a few years ago, got his contract terminated by MLS, not just Montreal, the entire league of MLS terminated his contract because he illegally entered an indoor soccer league, an amateur one, during the season and got ejected from that league for punching it and spitting on a player. And then he went to Newell's Old Boys, of course, Poch's boyhood club, and Messi's as well. Had a decent season for them, but got his contract terminated there pretty recently. Again, because of behavioral issues. It's a huge concern, honestly. It's just a nepotism pick. There's no reason why he's here over someone like Cole Bassett as a midfielder, even Owen Wolf, Daniel Edelman, even Noah Buck if he could have made a switch. So many other players that I've already named. It's kind of criminal that he's here, honestly. Criminal literally because he did assault a guy. But hopefully he just doesn't fight any of our players. As long as we can get out of this camp without any interior drama caused by him, that's a win in my books. But honestly, it's a bit of a disgraceful call-up, and if this had happened for the senior team, I'd be going ballistic, and I'm sure everyone else would be too. Now, the next to last player, Indiana Vasilev from St. Louis City, another guy like Campbell who was part of a couple camps in the pre-Olympic process with the U23s. He is still just 23, so relatively young, but let's be honest, he didn't really have that good of a season for St. Louis this past year in an overall underwhelming year for the club. Playing in the midfield, playing on the wing, he wasn't overly effective. It's honestly just a head-scratching call-up here. Now, I will say he's probably just here because Quinn Sullivan wasn't released, but still, nevertheless, it's kind of just a waste of a spot, to be honest. Again, I'll keep saying this, I'd much rather see a fifth midfielder here than another winger like Vasilev. Then finally, you have Brian White. Not much to talk about here, just a striker for the Whitecaps. He does score a lot of goals in MLS to his credit. I believe he was actually the top American scorer in the league probably the past 2 years, so credit to him for that at least. But you can see he only has one cap. That was in the last Camp Cupcake in 2024, and he's still 28 years old. Like, he's never getting a chance in Europe. He's never getting a chance with the main USMNT. He's just here because he's being rewarded for good play in MLS, and to be fair, that's what this camp is mainly about, so I guess there's not too much to complain for there. Really, the only notable snub here, besides Sullivan, who wasn't released within this group, at least from my perspective, is Brandon Vasquez, who just made the move from Monterrey and Liga MX to Austin FC. Now, I don't know if the move wasn't made in time and Monterrey just didn't release him. I don't know what the situation is here. Maybe Vasquez wants to stay with Austin and get integrated to them in preseason. Maybe Poch has seen enough of him in the main USMNT camps that he's been in. I don't know. Regardless, he's better than all the strikers here. I feel like he should probably be here if he wasn't there. But honestly, that's about it. And it's not the most intriguing roster, but it was still worth a video explaining who these guys are, because some of these guys, like Ajimong, like Anelli, like Arfsten, I'm sure are probably somewhat of new names to you guys who don't really keep up with MLS, and it's perfectly fine. I mean, can't really blame you for it. So that comes to the end for the video. Let us know in the comments, what do you think of the roster? Are there any other key snubs that I didn't talk about that you think should have been in the team? Overall, how do you think we're going to do against Venezuela and Costa Rica? Do any of these players, do you think, have a real future with the USMNT? Maybe some of the younger guys, Luna, McGlynn, Jalen Neal. Let us know all of that in the comments. We'll make sure to reply to you as always. But with that out of the way, let's just see how we do in the games, and we'll see you next time.